to this process video in which I show you how I paint a gouache landscape from a photo reference that I took in 2019. So what I'm doing first, well, you can't see it on the page because of the very bright white light, but there is a very loose, very light pencil sketch that I have already put down on the paper after taping it off. And I'm going in first with some very thin washes of gouache. I'm using the Himimiya gouache, which is something I'm using a lot at the moment because, well, it's cheap, it's cheerful. I don't mind using as much of it as I need, and you can get some really nice color mixes with the different colors that are already available in the gouache set. I do have the large set, so there are already a lot of colors available to me, but I do find that I tend to stick to a fairly limited selection and mix the colors as I need them depending on the reference photo that I'm using. So this is a picture that I took on a very early morning walk with my dog back in 2019, as I said. And I've actually got the reference picture on a tablet next to me. You can see that off to the corner there. And I'm really at the moment just putting down the base layers very loosely, very thinly, adding quite a bit of water to the mix, and just blocking in the colors for the sort of the larger areas. So I'm blocking in the darks, blocking in the lights. Because this was a picture taken at dawn, there is this very luminous, beautiful light coming through. And what I'm doing now, as you can see, I'm actually taking away some of the paint there on the sort of the suggestion of the buildings in the background, because the sun was coming up behind them, so they were very pale in the picture as well. So they're quite far in the background. So I didn't want them to be too dark. But that's the nice thing about gouache, because it is a lot like watercolor. You can take away as much as you put down as well. Now I'm going in and adding in the overhanging trees, just very loosely again, just putting in the suggestion of branches. I will come back later and give these a little bit more detail if need be, but for the time being it's really just to mark out the different areas of the painting and wait for other areas to dry before I can go back in and fix those. So that's what I'm doing here, as you can see, just adding in branches very loosely, very sketchily. I should note I'm actually speeded up the video of this painting process sort of at 4 times the speed of what it normally is, so that I could fit it all in a 10-minute video without boring people to tears. So I think in total this painting took me about 40 minutes. I did it in 2 20-minute sessions, more or less. I do this quite a lot with my gouache studies these days. I don't try and do everything in one sitting. I used to be, paint it quick and dirty all in one go, and whatever you've done in one go was done. But I'm now trying to move away from that and give myself a little bit more time to go back and improve things. I'm also doing things in more layers, which with gouache can be a bit tricky, so that's why it's a good idea to give yourself time between the painting sessions to let things dry properly. If you've watched any gouache process videos, then you will know that gouache, particularly traditional gouache, is a lot like watercolor in that it reactivates if you put anything wet on top of it. And so you do have to be a little bit careful when you're going back over things that you don't accidentally reactivate the paint underneath. So what I try to do is start with very thin washes for the under layers, and then as I go further and further, and as I start adding on top of it, the layers will become thicker, so I'll use more paint and less water. I'm going back into the foreground here. So this, in the picture, this is basically just a huge clump of nettles and shrubbery, rather indistinct, but it's also in a lot of shadow, so there's not a lot of detail here. but I am trying to get a little suggestion of the stalks and the leaves, and on the opposite bank as well. So as you can see, the layers are getting thicker and thicker. The colors are getting more pigmented as I go along. I think I'm coming up to the end of the first half here, so you'll see a jump in perspective as I move to a slightly different position. In fact, I think that's already happened. Yes, it has. So here we're in actually the second half, and I'm going back in, and now I'm adding more detail. So I've blocked in the colors that I want to block in. I've got a good idea of where all the elements are that I want it to have, and now what I'm doing is adding volume and trying to also add some depth by adding these different shades of green to sort of indicate, you know, what the light side is and what the dark side is. The nice thing about leaves is that you don't have to be too finicky about them. I tend to paint in a fairly loose, sketchy way anyway, as I've spent quite a lot of time working with watercolor. I am trying to be a little bit more detailed and a little less impressionist, but I think I'm kind of somewhere in between at the moment. So yeah, loose, sketchy, but still trying to sort of suggest those details by adding the different colors of green. And as you can see, I'm really just like dotting down these different colors. You don't have to get finicky. You don't have to get out your tiny brushes. You can just sort of use your paintbrush at different angles and with different sort of mixtures of paint. Another thing that I really like to do is just before I put the paintbrush down, sort of squeeze it so that it gets a little bit of a splayed edge, and that can also give you some nice texture when you put the paint down. Now I'm going in with a smaller brush to add some stalks and some suggestions of leaves, and just to give the foliage a bit more volume and a bit more depth. I'm also going in with a wet brush and blurring some of those edges so that the paint doesn't look too sort of, well, like paint, that it looks more natural, more organic. And now I'm going in and also trying to give a suggestion of the overhanging nettles as they hang over the bank there, and adding in some texture to the dark part as well, because even though this is mostly in shadow and it is very dark, there is still a lot going on here. There's a lot of underbrush, there's a lot of grass, there's a lot of weeds and things, and they are all sort of forming, well, they're sort of blending into the nettles and getting lighter as they go forward. So I'm trying to suggest that here with sort of darker nettles in the back and lighter nettles at the front. And if you notice, what I'm also trying to do is sort of paint the lighter areas first and then paint the darker areas last. Depending on what you're actually doing, this will work. Some people prefer to paint the dark first and then the light. In this painting, I started very much with the light first because it was the dawn light. It was this beautiful, soft, pale morning light that was really important for me to capture in this. That's the whole point of this study. I'm not painting leaves, I'm painting light. So what I'm trying to do is really capture that sort of feeling of the light coming through the trees. It's very bright, it's very pale dawn light, and trying to exaggerate that by painting a lot of light areas and then adding the dark on top of it, because the dark is actually in the foreground and the light is in the background. So we're coming up to the end of the painting now. I'm just adding in some extra white here just to sort of heighten that light area, that area where the sun is just about to come up above the buildings. This is sort of just pre-sunset, dawn, but you know, pre-sunset light, which is why it's so light and so pale. And so I'm just going back in, emphasizing that, adding a bit of the mist that was on the ground at the time, giving that suggestion of it, pushing the buildings into the background, almost overpowering them with this dawn light. And then, of course, the sun is starting to peek over the buildings, so there is this sort of suggestion of sunlight glinting off the edge of the leaves on the sort of the sides of these big clumps of branches. And that's what I'm suggesting here with these little bits of yellow in the leaves. And a little bit of extra shadow in the back there, just to sort of give it a bit more texture, so that it doesn't look like just one big solid mass of color. A little bit of extra yellow there just to emphasize that sunlight. And we're almost done. And then of course comes the best part of all, which is the removing of the tape. So here I am removing the tape, the final part. As I said, gouache dries very quickly, so you can pretty much do this almost immediately. And then here you can see the final picture as it was. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video.